Hello, and welcome back to We the People Naturalizing Naturalization. I'm your host, Ishika Muchhal, and as you'll recall, or welcome if this is your first video, I made this series as a way to help anyone studying for the US Citizenship Test, or anyone who wants to know a little bit more about what makes the US the US. So today's episode is about US history. This will be a very concise version, focusing only on the things that are part of the citizenship test. If you want to see the previous videos, you can click the little ad card above, or skip to the end of this video and there will be a link to the playlist with all of the videos. And I have one more to come that will be about US geography. Alright, so since this is US history, and US history is long, let's jump in. Okay, I will be dividing the history into units that are designated on the US Citizenship Test. Our first unit is, as you can see, the 1400s through the mid-1700s. This is basically our pre-colonial and colonial period. So before colonists arrived from Europe, the Americas were settled by indigenous populations and indigenous tribes. And there were a multitude of them, so instead of trying to pronounce them and doing a terrible job, I have listed them all here so that you can read at your own pace. So you need to know at least one of these tribes for the test. Now, some European countries decided that they wanted to explore and come to the new lands, the newfound land, and the lands that were at that point being discovered, although they were already settled. So the main four countries from Europe that participated in colonization of the Americas were Netherlands, England, Spain, and France. And this map here shows the general areas of North America that they colonized. Okay, so along with the colonizers came the colonists, the people who came here and settled and decided to stay. And they had a couple of reasons that they came here. And these are listed here. They wanted to escape persecution. They wanted to be free. They wanted to be able to practice their religion freely. They wanted economic opportunity. Lastly, I want to tell you a little bit about triangular trade, which is the system of trade that developed between North America, Europe, and Africa, through which, from Africa to North America, slaves were forced to go there for labor. Then from America to Europe, they sent raw goods, so like lumber or tobacco. And then from Europe to Africa, they sent manufactured goods. So that's a map of that. All right, we have covered our pre-colonial and sort of edging into colonial time period. Let's move on to the next section. All right, so the late 1700s was the Revolutionary era, specifically for the British colonies, which is now the east coast of what is the current US. And those were the 13 original colonies which we were talking about on the US Star-Spangled Banner, the flag, but I will get more into which colonies and which states they became in the geography episode, which is the next one. And the colonists that were here were getting increasingly agitated by the way that the British government was ruling over them. And here are the three main reasons that they decided to finally declare independence from the British and fight for their independence. One was that they had no self-government. The second was that they were being taxed without having any representation in the British Parliament. This is where the phrase "no taxation without representation" comes from. So that was the second reason. And the third reason was that the British soldiers were being quartered in the colonist houses and against the colonists' will. So those were the three reasons that they wanted to finally declare independence. So in 1776, July 4th, Thomas Jefferson, who eventually became the third president of the United States, wrote the Declaration of Independence. All right. Then the war finally ended in 1783. With, of course, as we now know, the US was victorious over the British. Then in 1787, the Constitutional Convention met to write the Constitution, and there were a bunch of members. The oldest member was Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin is a person of interest, is one of the people that you should know for the test. And not only was he the oldest member of the Constitutional Convention, he was also the first Postmaster General. He also founded the first free libraries, and he wrote Poor Richard's Almanac. Okay, so basically in 1787 at the Constitutional Convention, the Constitution was written, or our founding fathers wrote the Constitution. And there was a document, which I have talked about in earlier videos as well, called the Federalist Papers. Basically, the authors were John Jay, James Madison, and Alexander Hamilton. So they wrote the Federalist Papers in support of the Constitution to get public opinion in approval of the new Constitution. Then the Constitution was approved, and in 1789, George Washington, who is known as the father of our country, became the first US president. Okay, that's about it for the Revolutionary era, and that takes us to the 1800s. Okay, the 1800s. The first major event that we have of the 1800s was the Louisiana Purchase, which is made by Jefferson, which bought the Louisiana Territory, shown in this map, from France. And this purchase was a really good deal, if I might say. It basically doubled the size of the US as it was then, so then it became twofold. And this was in 1803. Okay, so there were 4 major wars during the 1800s that you should know for the test. There was the War of 1812, there was the Mexican-American War, there was the Spanish-American War, and then there was the Civil War. The Civil War is really significant in our history and also a significant part of the test, so I'm going to delve a little bit deeper into that one, but you should know the names of all the 4 wars. So the Civil War was between the North and the South, and it started in 1860 and went on till 1865. The president of the US at the time was Abraham Lincoln, who is known for writing the Emancipation Proclamation. The Emancipation Proclamation was the document that freed all the slaves in the Confederate States, only the Confederate States. And he was known for leading the Union through the Civil War and maintaining the unity of the nation. So there are 3 main reasons why the Civil War happened. The North and the South did not agree because they had different economic reasons, different views on slavery, and they had different views on states' rights. So those are the 3 main reasons that the Civil War happened. So all of these reasons caused the Confederate States to secede, but at the end of the Civil War in 1865, they rejoined the United States, like the Union, the North side. So Abraham Lincoln is a main figure that is associated with preserving the Union during the Civil War. Also during the 1800s, pre-Civil War, there was a period called the Antebellum era, which was a major era full of basically the starting points of the civil rights and the women's rights movement. And a really important person that you should know for the women's rights movement, a fighter for female suffrage and civil rights and equal rights overall, was Susan B. Anthony, among many other people. But for the test, definitely know Susan B. Anthony. All right, let's move on to the 1900s. All right, 1900s. So a large percentage of the test that is on the 1900s has to do with the wars that were fought, because they were quite significant. The first war that was fought was World War I. And during World War I, the President of the United States, you should know this for the test, was Woodrow Wilson. So then there was World War II. In World War II, the President of the United States was FDR, or Franklin Delano Roosevelt. You can just remember FDR or Roosevelt. So he was the president at the time, and there was also an important general who fought for the US during this war that you should know, later became president. His name was Dwight Eisenhower. That's a question on the test. Okay, so the World War II was fought between two sides, the Allies and the Axis. The Allies consisted of the United States, Britain, Great Britain / UK, China, France, and the USSR, which is now Russia, the Soviet Union basically at the time. And then the Axis were Germany, Japan, and Italy. So that was World War II. The other wars were the Persian Gulf War, the Korean War, and the Vietnam War. Now there's another special category war, which was technically not a war, but it has war in the name. There was no fighting. It was more like when you get into an argument with your friends and you don't talk to each other and you're constantly planning and battling and mentally planning against each other, but times 1,000 times 2 countries. That was the Cold War between the US and the USSR. And that was to fight communism. Communism was the main concern that the US had at the time of the Cold War. Also, a big part of the 1900s was the Civil Rights Movement, which was led by Martin Luther King Jr. and fought for equal rights and civil rights for all people. So this was a very important part of the 1900s and happened between the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. And this is the movement that laid the groundwork for a lot of bills to be passed, like the Voting Rights Act and the Immigration Act and the Equal Rights, the Civil Rights Act of the 1960s. Multiple laws that were passed during that time. And these laws and the movement that happened during that time set the framework for the civil rights struggle that continues today. And it was led, as I said, by Martin Luther King Jr. So that's all you need to know for the 1900s. I'm going to add a little 2000s category here. So the one event that you need to know for the 2000s is what happened on 9/11. September 11th, 2001 was the terrorist attack on the Twin Towers, terrorist attack against the United States. So that is the one event you need to know for the 2000s. And with that, we have finished a very, very, very brief version of the United States' history. I hope you join me for our next episode, which will be the last episode on US geography. Feel free to subscribe, share this video so that more people can see it. If you know any of your friends or your parents' friends or your classmates or whoever that you know who would be interested in watching these videos, I would really appreciate it. You can make sure to subscribe if you want to see my latest videos or the videos before this for this series. They're up there. And take care, stay safe, and I will see you next time.